Madam President, I'm here on the floor today with no better news. We all woke up just days ago to the news of another mass shooting, this time in Kalamazoo. On Saturday, another community was changed forever by gun violence. We live it every day in Connecticut, still mourning 20 dead first graders and 6 teachers who protected them. In this case, the alleged killer used a semi-automatic handgun to kill 6 people and injure at least 2 others across 3 incidents between about 6 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. that Saturday night. The shooter first shot a woman several times, leaving her seriously wounded. Then next at a car dealership, he gunned down a father and a son. Later, he approached 2 cars that were parked outside a neighboring Cracker Barrel restaurant. He opened fire there, and he killed 4. I've been coming down to the floor now for almost 3 years, telling the stories of victims of gun violence. And I'm going to talk about 6 today, but unfortunately, the statistics tell us that there are 86 every single day killed by guns, 2,600 a month and 31,000 a year. The vast minority of them are due to mass shootings. Most of the individuals on this list are killed by virtue of suicides or by individual acts of violence, domestic violence, for instance, violence that happens in the cities of America like Hartford and New Haven, New York and Los Angeles. But what's astounding to many of us is that despite these numbers, which, as I've made the case before, are unlike those of any other industrialized country, we do absolutely nothing about it. We do nothing about it, right? We don't pass stronger gun laws. We don't strengthen our mental health system. We don't give more law enforcement resources. All we do is just catalog the numbers of dead every single day and every single month. And so the statistics apparently aren't moving this place. And so hopefully, my hope is that the voices of these victims, to give you a sense of who these people are and the just trail of tragedy that is left behind them, researchers will tell you that there are often over a dozen people who experience serious levels of trauma in the wake of one person being killed by guns. Maybe these stories will change people's minds. Stories like that of Mary Jo Nye, who was 60 years old and she was killed last weekend in Kalamazoo. She was enjoying a night out on the town with her former college roommate, her sister-in-law, Mary Lou Nye, and her friends Barbara Hawthorne and Judy Brown, when all of their lives were taken by this seemingly random shooting. Mary Jo was a retired English teacher from Calhoun Community High School, where she dedicated her time and her talents to helping students who were at risk of dropping out. It's not an easy job, but she put her mind to it and she put her heart to it. One colleague commented that, quote, she was an English teacher, but she was a lot more than that to the students who don't come from great home lives. A friend said that she was always reaching out to others and helping families. This friend said, it just doesn't make sense. Mary Jo saw helping others as her calling in both her professional and her personal life. It's just a tragedy. Mary Lou met her sister-in-law, Mary Lou Nye met her sister-in-law, Mary Jo, when they were in college, where they were actually roommates. And Mary Lou fell in love with one of her roommate's older brothers, eventually getting married, and they made the roommates friends, but also family. Mary Lou dedicated her time as a manager of the Michigan Secretary of State branch in South Haven prior to its closing. And then she shared her love of children for the last 6 to 7 years working at a daycare center. A local pastor said she always had a smile on her face and she was just beloved by the kids that she worked with. Quote, it was never about her, he said, always about making sure that things were right for the children. Her son said that his mom loved reading books and doted on her grandson, 5-year-old Jeffrey. She herself was the youngest of 5 children. Her grandson, Jeffrey, won't be able to spend that time with his grandmother any longer. 68-year-old Barbara Hawthorne was in the back seat of Mary Jo Nye's car when she was killed. Her family said, quote, our Aunt Barb was easy to laugh, a generous, giving person who loved her many family and friends. She was a true hippie who marched for civil rights in the Deep South, recycled everything that came through her home, and believed in marching to your own drummer. She loved theater and live music and shared tickets to performances whenever possible. Dorothy Brown, known as Judy to her friends and neighbors, was also with Mary Jo and Mary Lou and Barbara. Neighbors remember Judy's generous and friendly spirit. She readily shared her homegrown herbs and always took time to share a friendly wave with her neighbors. One neighbor who did odd jobs for her occasionally, helping out around the house, always got a gift card from her at the end of the year. She was described by one neighbor as just a sweet, sweet old lady. You couldn't ask for a better neighbor. Tyler Smith was 17 years old, and he was with his father shopping for a car when the shooter drove by and opened up fire, killing both the father and the son. Tyler had a very bright future ahead of him. He was enrolled at the marketing entrepreneurship program at the local tech center. In addition to high school, he was, according to his friends and family, studying marketing so that he could help open a family business with his father, his sister, and his cousin. His superintendent, who knew Tyler well, and it means something about a kid that their superintendent knew this particular student well, that tells you he was marked for something big, said he was such a great kid, always had a smile on his face, always happy, and very well liked. His father, known as Rich, was killed alongside while they were shopping for this car. A family member remembers Rich saying, "When he was in your presence, it automatically put you in a good mood. He had this contagious laugh and he always smiled." A friend said Rich was always there to lighten it up and laugh it off. He was such a wonderful man. That's 6 people of the average of 86 killed every day, just in that one episode in Kalamazoo. What's so sad is that when the shootings in Kalamazoo began that Saturday evening, a dozen other people had already been killed in multiple victim incidents since the weekend start. So set aside all of those one-off incidences of gun violence, set aside all of the suicides. Just last weekend, before Kalamazoo happened, a dozen other people had been shot across this country in multiple victim incidents. There is no other country in the world that has that level of epidemic mass gun violence. And I'll speak at another time about why that is. But what is unexceptional about the United States is that the American public want to do something about it. They don't accept this status quo, just like other countries' public wouldn't accept it either. 92% of Americans are in favor of universal background checks. And we can't even get a debate on this proposal on the floor of the Senate, nor in the House of Representatives. Democracy normally doesn't allow for 90% of Americans to support something that their legislative body won't even consider. 85% of NRA members are in favor of universal background checks. By the way, all that means is that you have to prove that you're not a criminal. You have to prove that you haven't been deemed mentally incompetent before you can buy a gun. Support for the laws that we want debates on the floor of the Senate, they're absolutely bipartisan. Here's background checks for gun shows and private sales. That's not universal background checks, but just for those 2 particular forums. For that specific proposal, Democrats support it by 88%, Republicans by nearly 80%. Laws to prevent the mentally ill from buying guns, 81% Democrats, 79% Republicans. There's no difference. There's a little bit more difference when you come to a federal database to track gun sales, but you still have 55% of Republicans supporting that. And on probably the most controversial reform, which to me, for the life of me, I can't figure out why it's controversial, a ban on assault-style weapons, you got 70% of Democrats, but a near majority of Republicans as well, which tells you that the overall American population, despite their partisan registration, support even a ban on assault weapons, which of course, wasn't that radical long ago when it was passed and the law of this country. I won't go into this in detail, but again, you look at specific provisions and the overwhelming majority of the American public support them. Bans on semi-automatic weapons, bans on assault weapons, bans on high-capacity ammunition clip, bans on online sale of ammunition. Again, over and over again, you see that the overwhelming majority of Americans support these laws. And so Madam President, it's just simply time for us to respond to the voices of 31,000 victims every single year and do something about it. I'm going to continue to come down to the floor and share these stories, share some of these charts, share some of this data, in the hope that it will inspire this body to break out of its ice of indifference, as others have coined the phrase before me, and do something. I understand that we're not likely going to get a vote on background checks between now and the end of the year, but there's a big bipartisan mental health reform bill that we could debate on the floor before we wrap up for the year. And I would submit to you that that's not the answer for the epidemic of gun violence, but it would help. If you created more inpatient beds and more outpatient capacity, a lot of the very disturbed individuals who take these demons that exist inside them and turn them into an act of massive violence, that mental health reform bill could help them. It would just be the beginning of the work we have to do, but it'd be a pretty important beginning. At some point, the United States Senate, the greatest deliberative body in the world, an organization that claims to represent the will of the people, we have to start paying attention to the voices of these victims and the overwhelming majority of the American public who want us to honor them. I yield back.